The mistress was screaming. The husband was on the floor, his arm bent backwards, begging for mercy. And the pregnant wife they'd been laughing at for months? She was standing over them both with tears running down her face, and her hand still in a fighter's grip. "You said she was weak," the mistress cried. "You said she'd never fight back." But he couldn't answer, because his jaw was already broken. "Listen to me. What I'm about to tell you is the story of a woman who forgot she was dangerous. A woman who chose peace for so long that everyone around her mistook her silence for surrender. A woman who was pushed so far that she finally remembered what her hands were trained to do. And if you've ever been called too soft, too quiet, too kind, if you've ever let someone treat you like you don't matter because you didn't want to cause problems, then you need to hear what happened the day Grace stopped being gentle. Because by the end of the story, you'll never look at a quiet person the same way again. Stay with me. This one will change how you see strength forever. Welcome to Reality Stories Hub. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your view on the story and where you're watching from. Let me tell you about a woman named Grace. And before you think this is just another sad story, let me promise you something. This is about what happens when the kindest person you know finally stops being kind. Grace lived in a small town outside of Chicago. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where secrets don't stay secret for long, and where people judge you by who you married and how well you keep your house. But here's what nobody in that town knew about Grace. Before she became the quiet woman who baked cookies for church sales and never raised her voice, she was something else entirely. She was a state champion in Taekwondo. She had trophies lining her childhood bedroom. She had fists that could break boards and a kick that once sent a girl twice her size to the emergency room. That last part is important. Because that kick, that tournament, that moment when Grace looked at her own hands and saw weapons instead of tools for healing, that's when everything changed. She was 23 years old, standing in a competition ring, when her final strike connected harder than she meant it to. The other fighter went down and didn't get up for 3 days. 3 days in a hospital bed because of Grace's hands. Grace walked away from fighting that day. She took off her uniform, put her trophies in boxes, and told her coach, an old Korean man named Master Kim, that she was done. "Grace," he said, his eyes full of wisdom that comes from seeing students make mistakes. "Running from your strength won't make you a better person. It will only make you forget who you are when you need to remember most." But Grace didn't listen. She wanted to be normal. She wanted to be the kind of woman who solved problems with words, not fists. She wanted to be soft in a world that had made her hard. That's when she met Daniel. Daniel was a real estate developer. Not the small-time kind, the kind who built shopping centers and apartment complexes and made more money in a month than most people see in a year. He wore expensive suits and drove a car that cost more than Grace's college education. And when he smiled at her across a coffee shop one autumn morning, Grace felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. They dated for 8 months. Daniel took her to nice restaurants. He bought her flowers. He told her she was beautiful in a way that made her feel seen. And when he proposed on a beach in California, with the sunset painting the sky orange and pink, Grace said yes without hesitation. She thought this was her second chance. A chance to be the woman she always wanted to be. Gentle, loving, peaceful. She was wrong. The first year of marriage was okay. Not great, but okay. Daniel worked long hours building his real estate empire. Grace kept their house in perfect order. They lived together but existed in separate worlds. He had his business calls and meetings. She had her garden and her books. But it was quiet. And for Grace, quiet felt safe. Then Daniel's mother entered the picture like a storm nobody predicted. Mrs. Patricia Hartwell. That was her full name, and she made sure everyone used it. She was old money, the kind of woman who judged you by your last name and your zip code. And from the moment she met Grace, Patricia made one thing very clear. Her son had married beneath him. "So, Grace," Patricia said during their first Sunday dinner together, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Daniel tells me you don't come from much. What exactly did your parents do?" Grace swallowed her pride and answered honestly. "My dad was a mechanic. My mom was a nurse." Patricia's face twisted like she'd smelled something rotten. I see. And you didn't go to college? I took some community college classes, Grace said quietly. Community college. Patricia repeated the words like they were a disease. Daniel went to Yale. I do hope you can keep up with conversations at his business functions. Daniel said nothing. He just ate his roast beef and let his mother tear his wife apart, piece by piece. That should have been Grace's warning. But love makes you excuse things you shouldn't. Love makes you believe things will get better. Love makes you stay when you should run. The second year got worse. Daniel started coming home late. Started smelling like perfume that wasn't hers. Started looking at Grace like she was a piece of furniture he'd grown tired of. And Grace, desperate to save a marriage that was already dying, made herself smaller. She stopped asking where he'd been. Stopped questioning the receipts for hotel rooms. Stopped expecting him to look at her the way he used to. Then she got pregnant. For one beautiful moment, Grace thought everything would change. She imagined Daniel's face lighting up. She imagined him holding her close and promising to be a better husband. She imagined their baby bringing back the man she fell in love with. Instead, when she told him, he stared at her stomach like it was a problem he didn't ask for. Are you sure you want to keep it? He asked. Those 7 words broke something in Grace that never fully healed. But she smiled through the tears and said, It's our baby, Daniel. Of course I want to keep it. He nodded slowly, but his eyes were empty. Okay, but things need to change. I'm in the middle of closing a major deal. I can't have you being emotional and needy right now. A major deal. That's what mattered to him. Not her. Not their child. A deal. 6 months into her pregnancy, Grace was exhausted in ways that had nothing to do with the baby. She was carrying a life inside her while watching her marriage crumble. Daniel barely touched her anymore. Barely spoke to her unless it was to criticize. You're really letting yourself go, he said one morning, looking at her swollen belly with disgust. I'm pregnant, she whispered. Yeah, well, try to at least look presentable when people come over. Grace wanted to scream. She wanted to ask him when he became so cruel, but instead, she just made him breakfast and ate her pain in silence. And that's when everything truly fell apart. Because Daniel wasn't just distant. He wasn't just cruel. He was bringing another woman into their lives. Her name was Jessica. Jessica walked into Grace's life on a Thursday evening, and from the first second, Grace knew this woman was the reason her husband stopped pretending to love her. Daniel brought her home without warning. Grace was in the kitchen, 6 months pregnant, one hand on her belly, the other chopping vegetables for dinner. She heard the front door open and 2 voices. His and hers. This is my place, Daniel said, his voice full of pride and warmth that Grace hadn't heard in months. Let me show you around. Grace's knife froze on the cutting board. She heard high heels clicking on their hardwood floors. Expensive heels. Confident heels. The kind of heels Grace used to wear before Daniel told her they made her look like she was trying too hard. When they walked into the kitchen, Jessica saw Grace first. And the look on Jessica's face said everything Grace needed to know. Pity mixed with victory. The look one woman gives another when she knows she's already won. Oh, Jessica said, her eyes traveling slowly from Grace's pregnant belly to her bare feet to her simple cotton dress. You must be Grace. Daniel didn't introduce them properly. He just said, Grace, this is Jessica. She's my new partner on the Riverside Mall project. We'll be working in my office for a while. Grace's throat went tight, but she forced a smile. Nice to meet you. Would you like some water or tea? Jessica glanced at Daniel with barely hidden amusement. No, thank you. We have everything we need. They disappeared into Daniel's home office. The door closed, and Grace stood there, knife in hand, tears burning behind her eyes. For the next 3 hours, she heard them laughing. Low voices. The kind of closeness that doesn't exist between business partners. At one point, Grace walked past the office door to use the bathroom, and she heard Jessica say, You're so brilliant, Daniel. She's lucky to have you. And Daniel replied, I don't know about lucky. Sometimes I think I settled too fast. Settled. Grace's legs almost gave out. She pressed her hand against the wall to steady herself, her pregnant belly suddenly feeling impossibly heavy. She wanted to burst through that door. She wanted to scream. She wanted to demand answers. But the Grace who would have fought back died 3 years ago in that tournament. The Grace who existed now just survived. When Jessica finally left, Daniel walked her to the door like a gentleman. Grace watched from the kitchen doorway as he touched Jessica's lower back, leaning close to whisper something that made her laugh. After Jessica's car pulled away, Daniel came back inside and walked right past Grace like she was invisible. "How was your meeting?" Grace asked softly. "Fine," he said without looking at her. "What's for dinner?" That was it. No explanation. No acknowledgement of what just happened. Just a question about food. Grace served him the stir-fry she'd made. He ate in silence, scrolling through his phone, probably texting Jessica. When he finished, he pushed his plate toward her and said, "Too much soy sauce." She'd made it the same way for 2 years. He'd never complained before. The next week, Jessica came over again. And again. And again. Each time, Daniel grew bolder. More careless. He stopped pretending it was about business. Jessica would arrive in clothes too nice for a work meeting. She'd touch Daniel's arm when she talked. She'd look at Grace like she was dirt on an expensive carpet. One evening, Grace gathered every bit of courage she had left and confronted him. "I know what's happening," she said, her voice shaking. "I know about Jessica. And I need you to choose. Her or us. Her or your family." Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Then he laughed. Not a small chuckle. A full, cruel laugh that made Grace's blood run cold. "Choose," he repeated. "Grace, you don't get to give me ultimatums. Look at yourself. You're 6 months pregnant, no job, no money, nowhere to go. Where exactly do you think you're going?" The words hit her like fists. "I'm your wife," she whispered. "You're a wife," he corrected. "Not my only option." Grace felt something crack inside her chest. Not break yet. Just crack. Like ice before it shatters. "Why did you marry me?" she asked, tears spilling over. "If you think so little of me, why?" Daniel shrugged, his face cold. "Because you were easy, Grace. You didn't ask questions. You didn't demand anything. You just existed. And for a while, that was exactly what I needed." He paused, then delivered the final blow. "But now I need more." He walked away, leaving her standing there with one hand on her belly and the other pressed against her mouth to stop the sobs. That night, Grace lay in bed alone. Daniel slept in the guest room now. She felt her baby kick. Strong kicks. Urgent kicks. Like the baby was trying to tell her something. "Wake up, Mama. Fight back, Mama. Don't let them destroy you, Mama." But Grace didn't know how to fight anymore. She'd spent 3 years turning herself into someone soft, someone gentle, someone who solved problems with patience instead of power. And now she was paying the price. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. It was a Sunday. Grace had just come back from church, her belly heavy, her heart heavier. She walked into her house and froze. Jessica was sitting on Grace's couch in Grace's living room, drinking coffee from Grace's favorite mug. And Daniel was sitting next to her, his arm draped casually across her shoulders like they were the married couple. "Oh, good, you're home," Daniel said like this was completely normal. "Jessica's staying for dinner. Make something nice." Grace's vision blurred. Her hands started trembling, but not from fear. From something else. Something she'd kept buried for 3 years. "Daniel," she said quietly. "Can I talk to you? Alone." He sighed like she was being difficult. "Whatever you need to say it here. Jessica's practically family now." Jessica smiled, sipping from Grace's mug, looking completely comfortable in another woman's home. "This isn't appropriate," Grace said, her voice rising despite herself. "She shouldn't be here." "Why not?" Daniel asked, his tone challenging. "This is my house. I can invite whoever I want." "It's our house," Grace said. "Our home. Where we're supposed to raise our baby." Jessica actually laughed. A cruel, mocking laugh. "Oh, sweetie. You really think you have any power here? Look at you. You're falling apart." Grace's breath came faster. Her chest felt tight. Years of training she tried to forget suddenly pulsed through her muscles like electricity coming back online. "Daniel, please," Grace said, her voice breaking. "Please don't do this to me." He stood up, and for a moment, Grace thought he might actually ask Jessica to leave. Thought he might remember who they were supposed to be. Instead, he walked toward Grace and said, "You're embarrassing yourself. Go to the kitchen and make dinner. Stop being dramatic. Jessica's staying. Get used to it." Grace's hands balled into fists. Muscle memory doesn't forget, even when you beg it to. "Don't do this," Grace said quietly, her voice taking on a tone it hadn't had in years.
Low.
Controlled. Dangerous. "Don't do what?" Daniel stepped closer, his face inches from hers. "Cook dinner? Because that's literally the only thing you're useful for anymore." Jessica called from the couch. "Daniel told me you were too weak to ever fight back. That you just take whatever he gives you." I didn't believe him at first, but wow, he was right. Too weak to fight back. Those words echoed in Grace's head as Daniel reached out and grabbed her arm. Not gently. He pulled her toward the kitchen. "Let go of me," Grace said, her voice low and deadly calm. "Or what?" Daniel challenged. "What are you going to do? Hit me? Please." You couldn't hurt anybody. Then he did the one thing that changed everything. He shoved her. Hard. His hand made contact with her pregnant belly. "Move," he sneered. "You're in Jessica's way." That's when something inside Grace didn't just crack anymore. It exploded. And what emerged from the broken pieces wasn't the gentle wife who cried herself to sleep every night. It was the warrior who had been screaming to get out for 3 years. Grace's breathing changed. Deepened. Her stance shifted, subtle but unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look for. Her center of gravity lowered. Her eyes, which had been filled with tears moments before, went completely calm. Master Kim used to say, "The most dangerous fighter is the one who has nothing left to lose." Grace had just lost everything. Daniel saw the change, but didn't understand it. "What's that look?" he asked, laughing nervously. "You trying to scare me?" Jessica stood up from the couch, sensing something shift in the room. "Daniel, maybe we should just order food." But Daniel's ego wouldn't let him stop. "What are you going to do, Grace? You're pathetic." "You're." Grace's hand shot out so fast Daniel didn't even see it coming.
She grabbed his wrist.
Not like a wife. Like a master who had spent 15 years training her grip to be unbreakable. Daniel's eyes went wide. "What the?" Grace twisted. One simple, precise motion. Daniel's entire body bent forward, his arm locked behind his back at an angle that made him gasp in pain. "Grace," he started to say, but she wasn't listening anymore. Jessica screamed. "What are you doing? Stop it." Grace's voice came out calm, terrifyingly calm. "You said I was too weak to fight back." She applied more pressure. Daniel cried out, his knees buckling. "You said I was pathetic." Another adjustment. Daniel's shoulder joint began to separate. "You brought her into my home." Grace's voice broke, tears streaming down her face even as her hands remained steady as steel. "And you told her I was nothing." Jessica rushed forward to help Daniel, but Grace's free hand shot out, catching Jessica's wrist mid-motion. Grace pulled, using Jessica's own momentum against her, and suddenly Jessica was on the ground, her expensive dress twisted around her, staring up in absolute terror at the pregnant woman she'd been mocking. "You said she was helpless." Jessica screamed at Daniel. "You said she'd never fight back." Daniel tried to speak, tried to answer, but Grace's grip tightened, and she swept his legs out from under him. He went down hard, his jaw connecting with the coffee table on the way down. Grace stood there in the wreckage of her living room, breathing steady and controlled, while Daniel writhed on the floor holding his arm, and Jessica scrambled backward, her face streaked with mascara and terror. The woman they had mocked. The woman they had broken. The woman they thought would never fight back was standing over them like a storm they never saw coming. "Emily, stop," Daniel gasped, his voice wet with pain. "Please, I'm sorry." "Sorry?" Grace's voice cracked. Not with weakness, but with 3 years of buried rage finally breaking free. You're sorry now? Now that your arm is broken? Now that you're on the floor? She crouched down, her pregnant belly between her knees, and looked Daniel directly in the eyes. Where was your sorry when you brought her into our home? Where was your sorry when you shoved your pregnant wife? Jessica tried to crawl toward the door, but Grace's foot came down in her path. Not on her, just blocking her. A warning. Jessica froze. Did it make you feel powerful? Grace asked Jessica. Sleeping with another woman's husband? Sitting in her home? Drinking from her cup? Did you feel like you won? Jessica couldn't answer. She just shook her head, crying. Grace stood up slowly. You didn't win anything. You just showed me who you both really are. Daniel tried to stand, clutching his broken arm. Grace, this is insane. You're going to jail for this. Grace smiled. Not a happy smile. The smile of someone who had finally stopped caring about consequences. Am I? She asked. You shoved a pregnant woman, Daniel. You brought your mistress into our home. You put your hands on me first. I have witnesses. I have bruises. I have 6 months of your mother's texts calling me worthless. I have your credit card statements showing hotel rooms. I have everything. Daniel's face went pale. Grace had been quiet. But quiet people see everything. Quiet people gather evidence while everyone else is busy running their mouth. Grace walked to the phone with steady hands and dialed 911. Yes, there's been an incident at my home, she said, her voice calm and clear. 2 people are injured. They fell during an argument. Please send help. When the ambulance arrived 15 minutes later, they found Daniel with a shattered elbow and a fractured jaw. They found Jessica with a sprained wrist and what the paramedics called severe emotional distress. And they found Grace, 6 months pregnant, sitting calmly on the couch with her hands folded over her belly, looking more peaceful than she'd looked in 3 years. The police asked questions. Grace answered every single one with perfect clarity. Yes, her husband had pushed her. Yes, she defended herself. Yes, she was afraid for her baby. No, she didn't mean to hurt anyone. She just wanted them to stop. The officers looked at her belly, at Daniel's guilt-stricken face, at Jessica's expensive clothes and home-wrecking energy. They wrote their report accordingly. No charges were filed against Grace. The hospital kept Daniel for 3 days. His arm required surgery. His jaw was wired shut for 8 weeks. And every single time a nurse asked what happened, he had to mumble through metal wires that he fell. Jessica was released after 6 hours, but the damage to her reputation was permanent. Someone at the hospital talked. Word spread through Daniel's real estate circles like wildfire. Suddenly, everyone knew exactly what kind of man he was and what kind of woman she was. Grace filed for divorce the next morning. Patricia tried to convince Grace to work it out, to think of the family image. Grace blocked her number and never looked back. Daniel's lawyer tried to negotiate. Grace's lawyer, the best family attorney in Illinois, paid for with money Grace had been secretly saving in an account Daniel didn't know about, smiled and said, "My client wants the house, full custody, child support, and half of all assets. Or she goes public with everything. Your choice." Daniel signed without a fight. He knew he had no ground to stand on. 3 months later, Grace gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. She named her Hope because that's what her daughter represented. The hope she'd finally found again after years of darkness. She raised Hope in the house that was now fully hers. She went back to Master Kim, who welcomed her with open arms and knowing eyes. "I told you," he said gently. "Running from your strength doesn't change what happened. It only makes you forget who you are when you need to remember most." Grace bowed to her teacher with tears in her eyes. "I won't forget again." She started teaching Taekwondo to other women. Women who had been told they were weak. Women who had been broken by men who thought kindness meant cowardice. Women who needed to remember that choosing peace doesn't mean you've forgotten how to fight. And every single class, Grace would tell them the same thing. Silence is not surrender. Gentleness is not weakness. And the most dangerous person in the room is always the one who's learned to control their power, not the one who's never had any. Daniel tried to see his daughter once. Grace met him at the door, hope in her arms, and said simply, "You gave up the right to be her father when you put your hands on her mother. Don't come back." He never did. Jessica sent a letter months later, trying to apologize, trying to explain. Grace burned it without reading it. Some people don't deserve your forgiveness. They just deserve your silence. Years later, when Hope was old enough to ask about her father, Grace told her the truth in words a child could understand. "Your father forgot that love means respect," Grace said, brushing her daughter's hair. "He forgot that strength comes from kindness, not cruelty. And he forgot that the quietest person in the room is often the strongest." "Are you the strongest, Mama?" Hope asked, her eyes wide and trusting. Grace smiled, pulling her daughter close. "I'm strong enough to protect you. Strong enough to protect myself. And strong enough to know that I never have to prove it unless someone forgets." Hope hugged her tight. "I won't forget, Mama." "Good," Grace whispered into her daughter's hair. "Because you come from a long line of warriors. And warriors don't destroy people. We protect them. But when someone tries to destroy us, we remind them why they should have left us in peace." Grace didn't destroy Daniel's life out of revenge. She simply stopped protecting him from the consequences of his own actions. She stopped making herself small so he could feel big. She stopped carrying his shame like it was hers to bear. She just let him fall under the weight of everything he'd done. And she walked away into a life where she never had to pretend to be weak again. Because here's the truth that took Grace 3 years to remember. The most powerful thing a woman can do isn't proving she's strong. It's remembering she always was. Sometimes it takes the worst betrayal to remind you of the warrior you forgot you'd been. Sometimes it takes being pushed to your breaking point to realize you were never breakable in the first place. Grace wasn't a victim who got revenge. She was a warrior who simply stopped pretending to be anything less than what she'd always been. And in the end, that was the greatest power of all. The power to choose peace. And the power to end it when peace is no longer possible. Daniel spent the rest of his life knowing he married a queen and treated her like a servant. That his biggest mistake wasn't the cheating. It was forgetting who she was.
And Jessica?
She learned the hard way that some women aren't competition. They're just waiting for you to reveal how small you really are. As for Grace, she never needed to throw another punch. She just lived her truth, raised her daughter, taught her students, and became the woman she was always meant to be before she met a man who made her forget. Strong. Unbreakable.
Free.
And if you ever asked her if she regretted what happened that day, she'd tell you something Master Kim taught her long ago. Regret is for people who wish they'd fought back. I have no regrets. Only gratitude that I finally remembered who I was. So let me ask you something, wherever you're watching this from. New York, London, Tokyo, Lagos, Mumbai. Have you ever made yourself smaller for someone who didn't deserve it? Have you ever been told your kindness was weakness? Remember Grace's story. Remember that silence is not surrender. That gentleness is not weakness. That the quietest person in the room might just be the one who changes everything. If this story touched your heart, hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on the notification bell. And in the comments, tell us where you're watching from. Because your voice matters. Your story matters. And you are stronger than anyone who ever tried to break you. Thank you for being here. Until next time, remember, you are always strong. You just forgot for a little while. And that's okay. Because warriors always find their way back home.